All right, so the quote that you see on this screen is by Charles Caleb Colton, a cleric, a writer, and he stated, "The family is the most basic unit of government, as the first community to which a person is attached, and the first authority under which a person learns to live. The family establishes society's most basic values." And this is the guy who made the quote. He's from a highly married demographic. And they're just as married now as they were when he created this quote. So their civilization has reached an ascent through constant building of order and family. I believe the family is the center of their rise. And so where he was in the initiation of this quote and looking at the descendants of his people now, well, let's just say they are a highly married group. They have high moral esteem. They work together in greater ways, among many other social attributes, as compared to us, where, well, there are so many deficits. And diving into this quote, the concept of our families as governments is definitely not something I would have previously considered, but I love the wording of it. He said it is the first authority. So our families, and the lack thereof, showcases the qualitative design of the larger community, because a community is supposed to be a compilation of families. But what we see in our demographic is a massive number of broken homes, and that contributes, of course, to that larger broken community. So we don't have an ideal authority, and if we're going to go with the phrasing of governments, then we can say we have a corruption of our government, which is our family, and it's creating a corruption of our society, which is our people. So the authority is as good as who's leading it, and if there's nobody leading the home, then you can only imagine how we're going to be engineered. We're going to be engineered somehow, and obviously much of that engineering does not come from the home, and it comes from people who also have structural disadvantages, so that we're all being led astray. And so the family would have been a better way to construct an idealized society, because think about it, numerically speaking, how can you lord over a lot of adult people? How can you lord over different factions of humanity in massive, untamed, unregulated numbers? The family is that small scale rendering of humanity, so that if everybody governs their family and they govern it effectively, then that's so much easier in the large scale versus having a bunch of unregulated adults randomly unite, not know what they're uniting for, and then some so-called leader that was one of us that had to somehow tame those numbers. You'd still have to get the population under control. And I believe the family, because of it being a smaller sample size of the human population, is a greater way to be regulated. So we need our families to rule us. They need to become our rulership. To be frank, when you look at most of the behaviors in our collective and how antisocial they are, antisocial not as in shyness or introversion, antisocial as in the behaviors that make it difficult for another person to coexist. And how our behaviors are antisocial in the sense that we are rude, we're harsh, we mistreat each other, we devalue one another's lives. And with the corruption of the family, you can imagine how, with all these broken homes, with all these chaotic homes, how that's going to trickle into the larger society. If they don't even have a true intact family that they can rely on in the home, how are they going to reflect that in other people who look like them? Because if everybody they are the nearest to is some form of dysfunction, of course you're going to project that to other Black people, regardless of the proximity. So we need to rebuild the home, because that would mean that the first community that you're attached to becomes the people that reflect in a higher level alongside of the larger community. all these issues with how the men see the women and the women see the men, and how no one really wants to make family with one another. They want to make enemies out of the other. They want to scam the other. They want to mistreat the other, abuse the other, play games with the other. That's going to affect not just the two parties that make up that family, but how that affects the large scale of the group. And it reminds me of the concept written about in Titus, which is a book in the Bible that talks about how the men should teach the men and the women teach the women how to be spouses and parents. Well, we are on a second-hand level teaching each other how to be as a community, because we're seeing other people who are the same sex or the opposite sex, how they navigate this world. And that informs us, but in this case, in the worst ways. So if we had more families to choose from, then it would be easier to teach us how to become families, how to create families. But with a lack of families, it teaches us what not to do. And that's why, as long as we continue in this failed cycle, you're getting the result that you put out. So it's not somehow a deviancy that we have so many broken homes and then we have a broken community alongside of it. That's just the common sense norm that would naturally come as a logical effect. We can change this, and we must change this so that we can have a healthier society. I mean, really, take a look at our society, our collective. Do you really think we are a series of regulated adults? When you look at us, do you really see a people that are remotely sane, balanced, a people that are well-disciplined, that they practice healthy behaviors within themselves? I'll just tell you, just off the top of my mind, that I perceive our people as extremely quick to anger, violent, destructive, harsh. They don't choose their words kindly. They are creating more than just broken homes. They're also creating a potential class of people that will be too closely related. I mean, think about it. If a guy has so many so-called baby mamas, and then those children grow up, and those kids don't know each other, just do the math. So you're creating, even in the physical health of our collective, a compromised bloodline. So I don't look at our people and see anything that would show that we are regulated, structured, balanced, orderly, and have healthy conduct, especially when you compare the circus of us to how militaristic and balanced other collectives even are. That we concern ourselves way too much on what's happening outside of us versus what's happening within us. I don't care as much about what other demographics think, because ultimately I'm at the mercy of their system and their infrastructure. So I have no choice but to comply. Because there is no refuge in my collective, however, and because it directly influences my life, wouldn't that be that much more integral to the fabric of my identity? You think that by talking about discrimination all day, every day, you're changing the game for us, as if everything is innately ideal on this side of the tracks. Even if you dealt with all the discrimination, how does that better our home lives? How does that build more Black families? How does that ensure that Black fathers will actually stay in their children's lives? How does that create more marriage rates? How does that create a community that's tighter knit? That should be our priority, but for some reason, we're not thinking about that. And if you can't even do with the little that's in your nearest reach anything, what makes you think you can do anything if you were to be given power? You'd still run it with the same corrupt mind that you already have. And guess what? Hey, look at our governments now. Look at our governments all around the world, where we're running governments in countries where the majority of us exist. They are corrupt because they have that same mentality that is creating these broken civilizations around us. So what is it about us that is so anti each other's life that instead of creating norms that will actually furnish our lives, we are making each other's lives hell? We got to get to that point where it's not so anti our lives. We got to get to that point where instead of convincing other people that your life has value and merit, you start to do that for yourselves. Because I'm not going to believe my life matters if no one in my collective is trying to nourish that point. You're not telling me my life matters if these fathers are abandoning their wives and children, if these fathers are abandoning their family groups. You're not telling me that my life matters if you're recklessly breeding into this chaos. You're not telling me that my life matters if we're not getting together and creating solutions to saturate our lives. And then when you have organizations that say that our lives matter, but they just don't want our families to exist, oh yeah, that's a contradiction. Discrimination will always be there, but what can we do within ourselves to shift the narrative? We're not running our government well because, just as a disclaimer, conversations like these tend to get people thinking, oh, well, that's respectability politics, or they have fancy words, all these fancy social justice words that make it difficult for us to handle conversations of crime, handle conversations of our broken homes, handle conversations that actually hold us accountable for our dysfunctions. Even with my belief system, I believe that we got ourselves into this because of our dysfunctions. So if we're not going to be, as adults, able to changing the norms, holding ourselves accountable, knowing there is a problem, then you're just going to keep the addiction going. That's how you beat addictions. You have to know you have a problem. That's the first step. And so we have this ability to do the same thing over and over. Let's start to know, hey, there's a problem. Because if I can't even call out the problem without it always being another problem outside of us, we're never going to get things done. We have way too many difficulties for us to only be looking at somebody else's problems against us. I don't care why they hate you. There's probably a litany of reasons that they would subscribe to. I just want to understand why we can't have families. I want to understand why we can't love ourselves. I want to understand why we don't have communities. I want to understand why that's not the priority. I want to understand how to rebuild the people that are nearest and dearest that I'm genetically related to. Most of the people you're genetically related to, most of the people that make up your family groups, most of the people that make up your lived identity as a Black person are other Black people. Why can't we be the priority for a change? Why does everything have to be outside of us? We don't have many things in our material control, but if you were to see us as human resources, that's a material that we have the closest proximity to, that we have the most power and influence over, as compared to materials like gold or diamond, silver, bauxite, limestone, etc., aspects that come from our places of residence. So instead of focusing just on those external resources, because what are they without the human sentience around that to apply meaning? We as a material resource, we as a meaningful, renewable resource need to consider the quality and the sanctity of the lives that we are creating. And as such, we need to govern these lives effectively through our families and focus on what is in our direct control. With the little power you can have much influence. And when I say little, I don't mean that this is a small case study. To govern your home, it is a really powerful thing that any adult can do. It's extremely responsible, but it is something that isn't as extreme as controlling the electricity of a landmass. So you may think that it's not a duty, but you're helping so many lives because you're helping the lives of the people you're bringing into this world. You're helping the lives of the families who entrusted you with their offspring to be a partner to that person. You're helping the lives of future generations. You're helping the lives of the society who are witnessing this. So you're helping more lives than you really think. And that's in your power, and consider that power in a way that could actually wield positive results. As our governments, we need to focus on ourselves. We need to focus on our partners and the families we create with our partners. So let's regulate our individual choices. Then we regulate within our relationship, pair bonding habits, certain behaviors and choices. And then, of course, regulating our children's lives. And household to household, we can begin to rebuild our collective from what you can say is the ground level up. but it starts from somewhere, and it's not supposed to start from the top to the bottom. It's supposed to start from the foundation, which is the family, all the way leading up to the rest of our civilization. So we got to rebuild the Black family. We've got to create the government of ourselves, being our families, and let's let the Black family govern our empowerment. Let's let the Black family govern our unity. Let's let the Black family govern our sense of self. Let us rebuild our Black family governments. We are the Black family government. My name is Gershly Karen Pierre. Thank you so much for listening. I'm pro-marriage, pro the nuclear family, and I'm excited to see more Black family governments be created and more Black family governments in a righteous capacity. So stay tuned for more. Thanks for listening.